Welcome back to the OpenLayers tutorial on animating layers. We're going to pick up where we left off last time. We've got our base map up. If we go over to our code, we have our vector source set up, and we have it added to our vector layer, and we have a point style for the points we're going to create. Our next step is to create and animate some random points, and then add them to the map so that we can have an animated map. So first, let's create a function to add a random layer. So function add random, or I guess we call it add random point, not a layer necessarily. All right, and in that function, we are going to make it so it adds a random point somewhere on the globe. So to add a point, we need an x coordinate, and we need a y coordinate. So var x, var y, and we're going to do math.random. Now we're doing this in a geographic coordinate system, so in degrees. There are 360 degrees in a circle, right? And so that's going to be our longitude, because the Earth is 360 degrees around. That's our x coordinate, is longitude. We describe it from 180 to negative 180, and so if we subtract 180 from this, we'll get a number that is between negative 180 and positive 180. Now we're going to do the same thing for y, which is latitude, except latitude only goes for 180 degrees, and so we're going to multiply it by 180, and we're going to subtract off 90, and so we get a value between negative 90 and positive 90, and that gives us our x and our y coordinates. All right, so we need to make a geometry for our point now. So we're going to make a var geom, and so this is going to equal ol.geometry.point, and we want to get it from an xy coordinates. We're going to do ol.proj, or project. We're going to do from lon lat, and then we're going to give it our x and our y coordinates, and that will create the geometry. Now from that geometry, we need to create a feature. So we're going to do a var, and we're going to give it a feature, and it's going to, we're going to create a feature from the geometry we just made. And we can do that with new ol.feature, and we give it a geometry, and then we need to do feet.setStyle, and we're going to give it our point style, and then we can do source.addFeature, and we're going to give it our feature. Okay, and that gives us a new random point feature that will get added into our source, our vector source, which then gets added into our vector layer. All right, guys, you gotta forgive me again here. We need to have semicolons on the end of these lines. As you know, if you followed along, this is like my weakness with JavaScript, is I always forget to put my semicolons on the end of lines. And there I had some commas, which I don't know why I had those there. All right, so our code looks correct there, and now we're ready to move on. And we need to make it so that we do this at a certain interval, so our map can be animated at a certain time interval. Before we move on, let's make sure we save our JavaScript file. So let's set up a variable that tells us how long we want to have this feature show for. So I'm going to do var, which we'll call duration. And this is going to be in milliseconds, so we'll say 2,000 milliseconds or 2 seconds. And then we need to make a function that's going to actually flash this feature up. So we're going to call this function. We're going to say flash feature. And then in here is where we are going to make the magic happen. All right, and let's put my semicolon before I forget here. And we need to pass in a feature to flash here. All right, so the first thing we want to do is we want to get a variable for the time we start this, and it's going to equal new date dot time, I believe. Let me double check that for a sec here. Sorry, this is get time. And I'm going to actually change this to start time so that we don't get confused. Time might be a keyword variable there. All right. And so then we need to have a listener. We need to listen for when a function is, for when a feature is made in order to call this function. So we'll come down and we'll do var. This will be a listener, and this is going to be from our tile layer. And we want to do it after it's rendered, so post render. And we want to list. We're going to use the animate function once we see that a feature has been created. We're going to flash that feature. So the animate function is the function we're going to make next. So let's make a function inside of a function, and let's call it animate. And let's set it up here. And I just realized the mistake I made here. Sorry, this should be tile layer dot on. So after the tile, so we're saying after the tile layer has rendered, we want to listen for this call to animate. All right. Okay. So now I need you to stick with me here through this part. This is going to be the most complicated part of things. We're going to get the event that calls animate. We're going to get context for the vector layer. We're going to get information about the vector layer frame, and then we're going to do some math that shows how that kind of ring around the point fades in and out if you watch the original video. Okay, so once we get through this next 5 or 6 lines of code, things should get a little simpler. The first thing we need to do is we need to get the context for the vector layer, which is going to be ol.render.get vector context, and we want to get it for the feature that we just passed in, and we're going to make this a var vector context. Okay. All right, so we've got that feature there. We have the context for that feature. Now we need to get the state of the frame, of the map frame, basically. So we're going to do frame state, because we need to know the time that this happens so we can figure out how long to show that disappearing radius for. And so this is real easy. It's just event.frame state. And I apologize here. I just noticed that we need to get the context of the event, not of the feature. And so now we need to get the geometry that we want to flash. Okay, so we're going to get the geometry, and this is going to be feature.clone.geom. I believe. I'll double check that for you. We want to make a copy of that geometry so that we can flash it up. And I've got this feature.getGeometry, and then we're going to clone it after we get it. So that'll give us a fresh geometry. All right, so here we go. So now we are going to need to figure out how much time has elapsed, how much time we want this to last, and then get the ratio of that time so we can kind of fade that ring out as time goes on. This is actually really easy to do. And so we can call this elapsed. So it'll be the time elapsed. And so we can come over here, and this is going to just equal our start time. Sorry. This is going to equal our frame state dot time. So the time our frame state started. And we can just subtract start time from that to get how much time has elapsed since we started the animation. And then we want to get the ratio, so basically the percentage of time that has passed. So we're going to have this point flash up for this many milliseconds. We want to find out how much time has passed since we called this function, so we know how much longer it's going to stay up, essentially. And so if we do, we'll call this time ratio. And that's just going to equal our elapsed divided by our duration. And this is a property, a member function, so we need to get rid of that like that. Okay, so now we know how much time has elapsed, we know what percentage of the time has elapsed, so we can scale things accordingly. And so we're going to change two things as time progresses. We're going to change the radius, so let's do var radius, and we're going to change the opacity. Okay, and we can do this with ol.easing, and we can ease out. Okay, and we're going to do this on both of these. So I'm just going to copy and paste that down there. All right, and now we're going to use our time ratio to ease out. So we can do time ratio. So when our time ratio is 0, that means 0 time has passed since we did this, or since the call was made. And when the 0 time has passed, we want this to be the same size as our initial radius, which if we go up here was 5. Now at the end, we want this to be a radius of, let's say, we'll say 30. So we want to be 30. We multiply this by 30, or sorry. Yeah, we'd multiply this by 30 at the end, because by the end, we're going to have a time ratio that is 1. Okay, and we can play around with this when we get it up and running a little bit, and we can actually just add something on so we get a ring that pops out around it immediately. Okay, now what we want to do here is our ease out. We want to ease out the opacity. So as time goes on, we want this ring to disappear. And so an opacity of 1 means we have a solid ring, and an opacity of 0 means we can't see it anymore. So we want this to be 0 when time ratio is 1, which means if we do 1 minus our time ratio, we will get a value of 0 once our time ratio is 1, and so that will just start to fade out. Okay, so now that we have these, we need to apply these to a style. And so let's make a new style. So our style is going to equal new ol.style. And we're going to specify our radius and our fill in here. So once again, let's get an image, which will be a new ol.style.circle. Okay, and inside of here, we're going to define our radius, which we'll set as the radius we just created. Right up here. Perfect. And then we want to set our stroke, which will be a new ol.style.stroke. And we're going to set our color, which this time is going to be RGBA. And we're going to do the same color, so 255, 0, 0. Then we're going to do plus our opacity, and then we need to add on that final parenthesis there, and then let's finally do our width, and let's make this a little narrower, but let's have it grow as it moves out. And so if we do that plus opacity, as opacity, it'll get smaller, the stroke will get smaller as it moves farther away, basically, because when opacity is when opacity is low, so when you can't see through, it'll start to disappear, which is what we want to have happen. All right, and so that sets up our style. Okay. Okay, so we're getting close to done here. We just need to assign the style to our vector. So we're going to do vector context.set style with the new style we just created, and then we need to do vector context, and we need to draw that geometry. So we'll do draw geometry, and we're going to give it the geometry we just created. All right. So we have just a couple more things to do here. Make sure you save your animate.js so we don't lose any of our work. So now what we need to do is we need to stop showing this once our time has passed, basically. Okay, so we have this listener which is listening, and it's going to run animate at each time interval while this is happening. But once we get past our time intervals, once we get past duration, then we need to remove this listener so we can go back and view the map in regular, a new point can be added, so on and so forth. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to do if elapsed is greater than duration, and we're going to remove that listener, which we can do with ol.observable.un by key. We're going to give it our listener, and then we can return. And then we want to tell the map to continue what it was doing basically. So we do map.render, and that map will continue doing its thing. So now what we need to do is we need to tell source that when a feature is added, we want to flash that feature, which we're going to do source.on, which basically means when something happens. And when on add feature happens, we want to call a function. We want to pass the event, and the function we want to call is we want to call our flash function, which we call it flash feature. We want to call it flash. We want to call flash feature, and we want to give it the feature, which is going to be the feature from the event, which will be e.feature. Okay, so the event is add feature. Okay, so when add feature happens, we're calling a function and we're passing it the event, and the event is add feature, which contains a feature. Okay, so when we have that, we're writing a function that calls flash feature, and we're passing to it a feature. All right, so that means when a feature is added to source, we're going to call this flash feature deal here, our flash feature function. Now, the last thing we need to do is we need to tell the map when to call these features. All right, so let's go. We're going to do window, set interval. We're going to set it for a 1 second interval. And when that happens, we're going to call add random point. Let me just make sure that's the right name of our function. Add random point. All right, so we've got that called, and we should be about good to go here. Except that I've got these backwards, so we want to do add random point at an interval of 1,000 milliseconds. Okay, and then we're going to close, put our semicolon on there. All right, so we wrote a lot of code there, and hopefully I've explained that well as we went through. Basically, this last line of code is saying we're going to call this function every second. Okay, so we've got this saved. Let's go over and see how things work. All right, we're at the web map. Let's click refresh, and hopefully our code works, and it's not. So let's inspect and see if we have some errors here. And we do have an error. Set coordinates is not a function. Okay. So let me just, we're at line 46 here, add random point. Let's go back and fix that on line 46. And let me just make sure I've got this right. Okay, and the problem here is that I did not put new in front of that. So let's save this. Let's head back over to our map, and there you can see we've got points popping up. Let me close this out of the way. Okay, awesome. So our points are popping up. We're not seeing that that flash coming out. So let's go see if we can figure out what our problem is. And it could be that we have an error here. So if we inspect, all right, no errors. But there you can see we've got those points added, and I'll see if I can figure out what that error is here real quick. All right, so I may have found the problem here. And if we go to getGeometry, feature.getGeometry, this needs to be a call to a member function. It's not a member. So let's go ahead and try that, and let's see what happens. I did change the duration just to see what happened here, so I'll change that back so things are the same as yours. And let's go check things out now. Okay, so let's refresh our map. Okay, we're still not getting it. Alright, so I figured out the problem. There's two problems we have here. The first is that we need a comma and a space after this 0 down here on line 71. The next is that we need to use the function flash and not flash feature. Okay, so we need to use this function flash so it actually flashes. And so we need to change that to flash and that to flash. So down here I'm on line 90, and up here I was on line 54. Okay, so let's save that and let's hope we get this working again. Oh, and it's still not going. Okay, give me just a sec. Alright, and we have a capital F in source.on, so we need to change that to a lowercase f to add feature. And I think that should be our last problem. Let's go check it out. Alright, let's clear it. There you go. Now we have the animation working. Sorry guys, there were a few bugs in there, but I think we've got it figured out. You can now see your points getting added, and they're being animated as they do so. You can play around with some of those numbers a little bit to get things more the way you like it. Alright, I just want to point out something. I changed this function name back to flash, and I put it flash feat, F-E-A-T. Okay, and you can see I did it here as well. So our problem was actually had a capital F in the on call, and not that the function name was a problem. If I go back over here and refresh, you'll see that it's still working even with that. So guys, I apologize for all those bugs. A little bit of a rough day, but we got it figured out, and I hope you found this tutorial fun and useful. I think it's going to wrap up the web mapping for a little while here. I want to get back to doing some QGIS stuff in the next videos. Thanks for sticking with me through it. Hope you've enjoyed it, and have a great day.